Constructs are, in my opinion, one of the most interesting combat mechanics that Genshin has. Being able to place something on the field that stays around and interacts with other abilities in special ways seems like it should provide some very useful and very unique combinations that you can build teams around. Chiori, of course, is one of the newer characters that heavily relies on the construct mechanic, and she does over 60% more damage from off-field when there is another construct present. And despite her being an actually pretty strong character and one of my favorite designs in the game, it saddens me to say that her state in the meta and the state of constructs in general is absolutely dismal. This is due to problems that were baked into the game from the very beginning and some new ones that have been created since. So let's talk about why this is, talk about why Chiori probably isn't worth it from a meta perspective for anyone right now, but why I still have hope beyond hope that it will see a resurgence sometime in the future. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. And of course, we will include a slightly updated Chiori guide because I know some of you are like me and you are going to get her regardless. She's a character that focuses on raw stats, so you definitely want a level 9 tier, especially since she scales on defense, very important. If you're going to use her, it is worth it to crown her skill. You can opt to leave her burst at level 1 if you like, because in many teams it is just barely worth using, and sometimes it's just a wash. You might as well not use it at all. For her weapons, her sword is obviously her best, the Oraki Misigiri. It is also probably the best generalist sword weapon in the game, especially now with Shalonen, so it's actually not a bad weapon banner to go for. If you're using a Shalonen team, which lots of characters do, it becomes immediately probably their second best option, and overall the best generalist option. It was already the second best option for a bunch of characters, especially Alhaitham when using a spread team or something. You definitely don't have to get her sword to do great damage though, it's just a good weapon if you are in 5-star land, but if not, the Harbinger of Dawn is completely free and it is absolutely amazing. Gives you tons of stats, very easy to not take damage and keep its passive. Just be a little bit careful because you do head right into an enemy when you use her skill, so sometimes she can get hit, but often it's very easy to keep up the passive, and it just gives way too many stats. Such a good weapon. It's generally better than other 5-star stat sticks, so don't really recommend those. Shalonen's weapon, which isn't officially out yet, is looking to be very, very good for her. Probably her second best behind her signature. Probably sometimes, possibly even better. Not sure, we'll have to wait a little bit longer. And the Natlan craftable sword, which I don't have crafted, does give defense, so it's a decent choice, but it's worse than Harbinger of Dawn, so you should probably just use that. For artifacts, you have two choices. Golden Troop and Husk of Opulent Dreams are almost exactly the same, so you can go for whichever you have a better set for. If you don't have either, I do recommend farming for the Golden Troop because of course it is much more resin efficient. It's a much more universal set that works on a lot of characters. But if you're farming a mono geo team and you're farming more and more and more and you're just on that train strongboxing for it, then Husk might be a great set too. If you do plan on using her burst, you do want to go for the Husk set, as the Golden Troop only buffs her skill damage, and so it's often better just to not use her burst. Plus her burst is often unbuffed anyways, depending on when you're using it in a rotation. It's still fine damage unbuffed, but it's all sort of stacking up to be the more efficient way to play her is just to not use her burst and just use Golden Troop. But Husk is a great set too. I don't think any other sets are really worth using. She doesn't do buffing and stuff, so damage is her main thing, so you want to get as much damage out of her as possible. Speaking of which, defense percent sands, geo damage, or defense goblet, especially if you're using the Golden Troop and you have her weapon, it's easier to get away with the defense goblet because you get a lot of damage bonus from her weapon and from the Golden Troop 4 set. You can always use a defense if that's what you have, but it becomes more and more worth it the more and more other sources of damage bonus you have. And finally, a crit rate or crit damage circlet, whichever one is best for you. And I suppose if you have none, you can go for a defense because she does get quite a bit of crit damage from her kit. You don't need to build any ER because it is not necessary to use her burst. It is much better just to focus on damage. And for substats, of course, you want to focus on crit rate, crit damage, and defense percent. I would say team building with Chiori is really, really fun. When you use her skill, she summons a doll. Her dolls don't follow around, but they can be pushed around, which isn't really something you'll ever interact with, but it is kind of funny. If you have Geo Construct on the field, you will summon 2 dolls. Alternatively, if you summon your doll and then you spawn a Geo construct, the second doll will also spawn. This means that you'll want to put Chiori on a team not just with another Geo, but with another Geo that can make a construct. She doesn't do double damage because of double dolls, because a lot of damage does come from her passive, but it is still minimum 60% more, maybe 65, maybe even up to 70%, depending on what calculations you're looking at. But yeah, overall, it's absolutely huge for her damage. She has an on-field playstyle where if you don't double tap your skill to switch, she gets a Geo infusion, but it's very short and it doesn't give her defense scaling on her attacks, so it's pretty much just bait. You'll almost always want to just use her skill summoning mechanic and then use the swap. And here's an example of when you spawn another Geo construct, a second doll appears. So what is the problem with Geo construct, and why am I not doing like, you know, 40 teams tested with Chiori? Well, first of all, I already did test a lot of teams with Chiori on my first Chiori review. But the problem is that there's not many characters that summon a Geo construct that are really, really good. And her personal damage isn't enough to overcome the sort of lack of damage by other Geo construct characters. So what do I mean? Well, we have Albedo, who does just frankly kind of disappointing damage. I'm not trying to dissuade you from playing Albedo. I love Albedo as a character, one of my favorite stories overall. I actually like his design, I like his voice lines, I like everything about Albedo. He just doesn't do that much damage. Chiori does about the same damage as him, albeit not in as good of AoE. With just one doll and with a second doll, it's just not even close. Ito for an on-field DPS is just frankly a bit lacking right now. I unfortunately didn't get his weapon as I was more money conscious at the time. I will get it on the next rerun, but I unfortunately haven't been able to get satisfactory clears. Like satisfactory, but I haven't been able to get like really good clears. I've been able to clear obviously in 36 star, but not get like the fast clears that I expect from what I would call the good DPSs. Alhaitham probably being the poster boy for good DPSs, but also his Geo sister Navia, you know, Zhao, Clorand. I find all of these characters massively easier to get really excellent clears with than I can with Ito. Not to say you can't, and maybe I'll change my mind after I get his weapon, but after testing both Beacon and Serpent Spine R5, I'm just left kind of a bit underwhelmed. And that's unfortunate because this is the team that Chiori contributes the most to. And you can run Zhongli here, you can run Albedo here for more damage, and you can run Farina here, and then you go for a healer Goro build instead, which is technically the best. And I guess with Albedo, you're not getting very many crystallizes, so you're losing out on Geo Resonance, which is not good. Geo Resonance is quite an impactful part of Geo teams. And overall, although Chiori was a good buff to this team, it still feels just a little bit underwhelming. I wish Chiori was just frankly maybe 20% stronger overall, because I feel like the Chiori Zhongli core could have been really awesome. We have this cool new character Emily, and the Emily Zhongli, along with Emily, Zhongli, Bennett, and Arlecchino, people like to play this team. And yeah, it's not as optimal as with Kazuha, but it's pretty good. And Chiori, who I would argue has more synergy with this team, as it's much more restrictive to need to have another construct on your team than it is to just need to have the burning reaction. Maybe not much more restrictive, but you basically just can play Emily with any pyro character, whereas Chiori not only needs to be played with another Geo, but also has to be played with a Geo that can make a Geo construct. So although I do find this team quite good, it's not as good as it is with Emily. It's not as good as it is with just using Yelan for vaping. I've had a couple strange uses. First, starting off with the Chiori Zhongli team for Novelette, but with the release of Kachina, even though you're reducing Novelette's passive, Kachina Chiori is actually a really strong combo. That's because Kachina's buff is just so impactful, and between having two Geo characters, you're actually getting a fair bit of crystallizes. It's not as good as a Zhongli shield, but it gives you quite a lot of resistance to interruption, and honestly, I get pretty good clears from this team. And so this is why that although Chiori is in a pretty sorry state right now, I think that this team and teams like it, so Arlecchino, Bennett, Kachina, Chiori, I think these teams have a lot of potential in the future. And then also Mualani and Shangling. I honestly see a ton of potential because these teams just do well. They do good damage. The Natlin buff from Kachina is really big, and because it creates a crystallize, it buffs both Arlecchino and Chiori. And same if you're using a Novelette team. Would I recommend someone go out and pull Chiori for this team? No, but it is a way that you can play Chiori. And so that's the main reason why I see Chiori getting so much better is Kachina, she sort of does the bare minimum for a character, like to work with Chiori. She creates a construct, and she has the Natlin buff. Yeah, her damage is all right. Like, it's not 0 if you have Constellation 6 Kachina, which I don't, so my damage actually is 0. But imagine if we could get a new Geo 5-star that either did damage really on field or off field, but create a construct and was actually did something, like actually had buffs, actually had damage, as opposed to Kachina, who's just a free 4-star, who's totally competent, totally good for a free character, but just not really. She pulls her weight just because of the fact that she makes a construct and has an artifact set. That's really good. Finally, when it comes to Navia teams, Chiori, until the release of Xilonen, was my overall favorite Geo unit, being overall about the same as Zhongli or Kachina, who both have various pros, but my Chiori is pretty well invested, and I felt that at least her with her 5-star weapon, I found the best. Without her 5-star weapon, it's probably Zhongli for comfort or Kachina for overall damage, but now with Xilonen coming out, that all doesn't matter. Shilonen's going to be the best in-slot option for Navia, almost certainly, but we will have to test it and make sure. Either the double pyro with Bennett Chengling or the plunge with Shenyan and Farina. I especially like Chiori on the plunge version. You don't always have to get the most optimal team. Just because Xilonen is the most optimal, if you want to get Chiori, it's still going to perform extremely well. This is still a great team. Chiori still does good damage. If you end up getting Chiori C1, that I would guess is probably going to be on the same level of Xilonen. I won't actually be able to test that because I won't be able to get C1 unless I for some reason make another exception. But if you are pulling from meta, you won't get Chiori for Navia. Xilonen will be, that's all. You might be thinking, you know, you can just use Chiori Albedo, and every single time I use Chiori Albedo together, I'm just disappointed. It just doesn't do enough damage. Albedo's flower gets destroyed so easily, they really need to fix it. Old constructs are a huge problem. It's not a problem, like Chiori's dolls last and they stay forever, they can't be destroyed, but Albedo's do and he loses damage. Zhongli's construct also has the problem of getting destroyed, but it's not as big of a deal. It's just if you're using a buffing artifact set like Tenacity of the Millelith, then his pillar being destroyed means that you're not going to get the buff consistently and you're not going to get as much energy. Constructs also have this really weird limit where you can only have a certain amount of constructs on the field, which just artificially limits what Genshin could do in the future. And frankly, they just haven't done anything interesting with constructs in a while. Ito, yeah, I mean, he has a construct from his skill. Kachina has a construct. Albedo's off-field turret counts as a construct. Chiori's counts as a construct. Zhongli's kind of construct, but none of them actually like do anything. Chiori's, I would say, is the only one that really does something. Like Ningguang just has one, Goro just has one, but none of them like interact in a special way. None of them can be infused with an element or stack their power with even more constructs. And I feel like Genshin didn't realize when they were making the element system how much more powerful elemental reactions are, how much more powerful than elemental reactions are than the raw damage that most Geo characters can do. That's why, although they're comfy and easy to play, the damage just isn't where you want it to be right now. And that brings me to my final problem with constructs, and it's that they're releasing so many Geo characters that don't use constructs and just releasing very few Geo characters that do. Both Navia and Xilonen do not create a Geo construct. If Xilonen made a Geo construct, man, Chiori would actually be a good character, like a potentially even a great character, because using them together as like a dual core along with Farina and then just any DPS in the front spot or some buffer like Bennett or whatever it is, just using those two as a core would just be amazing. But unfortunately, we're left out in the cold and just hoping beyond hope that there's a new Geo character in the future that creates a construct. And it's looking like that Xilonen will be so strong that you'll want to potentially even play Xilonen in an Ito team, even though you won't be maxing out Goro's buff. You'll just run Xilonen, Farina, Ito, Yelan, and that's looking like it'll probably be Ito's new best team. So Xilonen will be so strong that she'll potentially even bump Chiori out of the team that she was buffing the most. And it's just because Geo construct characters are just out of tune. It's no longer the Geo is a problem, it's the Geo construct is a problem. The other sadness with Chiori is her synergy with Navia. It seemed that like Navia Chiori would have been so perfect together if either A, Navia created a construct, which like, why not? Maybe like why doesn't her burst summon a construct? Makes like it easily could have, like it summons a construct cannon that's shooting those things there. Like, bro, so frustrating. Coupled with the fact that Chiori's Constellation 1 removes the construct restriction, so the whole identity her kit is based around is lifted with the C1. which is just frankly very upsetting. So her synergy with Navia, her synergy with Xilonen is all of a sudden really quite good if you have Chiori C1. And as someone who's committed to Constellation Zero characters, except for Raiden, because she's my favorite, I am very upset that this C1 does this. And on top of that, it's not even an insane C1. For characters that already use a construct, it's not even really a damage increase. And you've got characters like Mulaney, Novelette, Farina, Linny, Arlecchino. They have insane C1s, and Chiori's just removes a restriction. Very, very disappointing. Because if they didn't have that Constellation 1, I would personally assume that they're planning on making more construct characters to work with her. But because of that C1, it always makes me worry. You know, yeah, I think that there should be more construct characters in the future, but like, what if they just expect you to pull C1 to complete your character? And that's how you're going to make Chiori work. And that just frankly rubs me the wrong way, and I don't like it. But it could all be saved with either, number one, a construct rework, which I hope for the most, where it's just an all across the board construct buff. I don't know exactly what it would be. Maybe when there's, maybe add to Georesonance, not as if it needs another thing, but another thing with Georesonance where construct strength is buffed and construct damage is buffed by a good amount. And then Chiori Ito combo gets a nice big buff. Chiori Kachina combo gets a buff and it actually becomes like a more viable team. They have reworked resonances in the past. The last time was in Sumeru. So it's probably too wishful thinking to hope that they'll buff it again, but I still think it's possible, mostly because Superconduct is an elemental reaction that I really think could do with a buff. And I think going into the Cryo region, I think that the Cryo Resonance could also use a buff, needing to be frozen or affected by Cryo to increase crit rate. I don't think that the affected by Cryo is a fair stipulation. I think it should just be across the board if you have the characters. So I could see a bit of an elemental reaction and resonance rework going into Shenhe, and I could see another construct character at some point being released in Natlin or the future that will make Chiori great. And I definitely hope for it because I really like her as a character. But if not, you know, just know that she is strong enough to use if you want to get her. She has some strong teams and really cheap teams with Kachina. That's a cheap slot that's pretty powerful and saves a really good unit for your second side. Right? Putting Chiori on and Kachina on a team is really, you know, low value. Like these are characters, these are not high value characters that they can free up other good characters for your other side of the abyss. So that does have some value. So if you want to get her, she's good enough. But if you want to skip her, you know, the Geo Construct meta is a massive skip right now and needs a huge buff, and hopefully we get it soon. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if I missed anything. Take care. Bye for now.